Hello everyone and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program with the Making History DLC, where I'm making a replica of the Apollo-Saturn V mission, and there's a continuation of the previous video where I built other replicas. And so here we have the Apollo command module and the service module with the service module engine, but you'll note that the service module engine has a 412 second ISP, and in the previous video I mentioned that I decided to change this engine quite drastically, and that's the one module manager patch you see there. And instead of the 412, I gave it a very modest 260, made it run on monopropellant, and adjusted its thrust to 90 kilonewtons instead of 375 kilonewtons, and also reduced its mass to compensate for the loss of thrust. As it was, I just felt it was an OP liquid fuel oxidizer engine with 412 second ISP when it's supposed to be sort of in the middle of the history of spacecraft development, so I just didn't think that it was appropriate. And I can certainly do the moon mission with these specs without having the OP engine. Now, people have noted about the service module that's supposed to be at the top of the Apollo command module, but you can see the obvious problems with this. It doesn't really fit on the top properly without tweaking it down, and it doesn't fit with the launch escape system that is meant for this capsule, so I decided to just leave this service module off until it's more aesthetically pleasing. Here we have the construction of the Lunar Module, which will land on the moon. I just built it directly under the nozzle of the AJ-10, the service module engine. They seem to have a particular idea based on that little cone that appears when you attach it to the node at the bottom of the Lunar Ascent Module there. What they want to do to attach to the bottom of it, but I didn't have the same idea, so I decided to attach it to the bottom of the engine instead. And I started making a structure of my own using these plates and new tanks. And these plates you can change the texture of, and obviously I've picked a gold foil texture. And the tanks look good too, and that's the particular arrangement that I gave the tanks inside the sort of structure of the Lunar Descent Module here, is what this is. The Ascent Module has fuel built in, so no problems there. And it is sufficient fuel to get off Kerbin's moon, so also no need to rebalance that. Here I'm tweaking the Descent Module engine, which is identical to the Ascent engine. It is one of these 48.7S engines. I forget what the new name for them, well, new name. It's been around for a while, but I still don't remember the name. I just remember it as the 48.7S. Okay, so our Lunar Module is complete. I'm tucking into the fairing, which is at the top of the third stage of the Saturn V rocket. So the rest of it is the rocket itself. And so we begin with a J2 stage. This is the S4B stage, and it's a single 3.75 meter mid-sized tank, and then the J2 analog. And then this is the second stage of the Saturn V. This is the S2 stage that has 5 J2 engines and a mid-sized 5-meter tank, again newly added with the Making History DLC. And then finally, using a thrust plate adapter for the J2s on the second stage, we can directly attach the first stage, because the thrust plate does have a decoupler. But before we move on, we should make sure that we have enough thrust-to-weight ratio on the second stage. I just wanted to match the thrust-to-weight ratio of the real rocket, which was 0.9. And so I underfueled this second stage. It's not strictly necessary, as it turns out, and as we'll see later, but I decided to underfuel it there. And we do have a new part as the engine adapter for the first stage here, so it just comes with the cones. You don't have to fiddle around with that. And then I put fins on because the Saturn V did have those fins. Here I am putting my own variant of the APS on the third stage, which is meant to settle the fuel down ahead of the Mooner, in this case, injection burn, and also to orient the stage towards the moon, or its trajectory out to the moon. And so I'm putting little RCS thrusters there, and basically after that we're done. So this is what it looks like on the launch pad, ignition, and launch. Regardless of whether you underfuel the second stage, it gets off the ground just fine using these tanks. And of course I've nerfed the service module engine, so I am actually carrying less delta V there, though the original service module engine is heavier, so there is that. But as we'll see later in this video, there's tremendous margin all the way through, frankly. So, but you might want to note the launch trajectory that I'm using here. This one is too high. I'll do it again with a more moderate trajectory but a mishap occurs there, you'll see. So here we are obviously getting too high, and I had a little problem with staging the launch escape system. I didn't have the staging right, and so now it is off. It'll cause us some problems later, but during the time when I was trying to figure out which part of the staging was the launch escape system, I was pitched up quite high, and so our trajectory right now is really steep. And in order to compensate for this, I pointed straight at the ground, more or less. Is this what you're supposed to do? No, of course not. But this is, I'm trying to bring that apoapsis in to get a more circular orbit, a more pleasing orbit. And frankly, we have way too much fuel anyway. I'll at some point maybe figure out exactly how to drain the tanks and thrust limit the engines. Right now the engines are not thrust limited, they're all at full thrust. But if we're going to drain the tanks to limit how much delta V this has so that it just has enough delta V for a Saturn V style mission, we're going to have to thrust limit the engines because the whole rocket will be lighter. Okay, so there we are in orbit, and we got to orbit on the second stage. We're not supposed to. Actually, we're a little bit short of orbit on the periapsis side deliberately because I really wanted to do the burn with the third stage that it's supposed to do to finish orbit. So in the real version, the third stage finishes orbit, shuts down, and then relights to send the payload to the moon. Here, we didn't strictly need to do that, but I decided to do this quick light anyway to fully make orbit, and then shut down. Actually, we didn't need to shut down at all. We're at the right time to transfer to the moon anyway, so I immediately started back up again. So yeah, no time wasted there. And we do have our trajectory to the moon with tons of fuel left in this third stage. I'll right click on there, and there you can see we have like nearly 2/3 of it left over. So yeah, plenty of delta V for all your missions that you would like to send these craft to. But it is time to separate off the command module, command and service module, flip it around, and redock it to the lunar module. So I had staged the docking port at the top of the lunar module to make sure that the command and service module got off when the fairing was separated. Okay, we have docked, and we need to get that decoupler at the base of the lunar module. Don't forget a decoupler. And get that off. Lots of fuel wasted, but I was trying to do the mission as it was done in real life for verisimilitude. But in the middle of this, I wanted to check whether it was possible to just fill up the second stage tank, because we did have that huge high trajectory, and it didn't seem like the rocket was having any trouble getting to orbit. So underfueling to match the thrust-weight ratio of the real mission seemed like maybe it wasn't necessary around Kerbin, which is smaller and doesn't really require those things. So here we go. This is fully loaded. All the tanks are topped up, and the thrust on all the engines is 100%, except for the service module engine, which I added the configuration to. Okay, so separation and ignition. So there we go, and the second stage is accelerating fine. And the trajectory overall is much better, we're not as steep. But I had forgotten to fix the staging for the launch escape system, so when I decided to hit the spacebar to separate the launch escape system, well, we separated the second stage instead. And so that's the situation we're in here. And this is where we'll see exactly how much margin we have with this rocket, because we don't have the second stage fuel anymore. There it goes. And we're flipping around and around, losing time to apoapsis, and still, I decided, looking at it, that we would have enough fuel to complete the mission. It would require some very indecent sort of trajectories here. So, for instance, with this third stage, which has a very low thrust-weight ratio, in real life it's 0.6. Here, it's, I think it's close to 0.6. I tried to match it. So we're going to have to keep that nose up really high, you can see, in order to make sure we're not going to fall back down. And actually a little bit higher than that after I separate the launch escape system. There you are. Yes, pretty desperate, but again, I figured that I had enough Delta V. I don't have Kerbal Engineer or MechJeb here, but after seeing the mission already launch once, I can figure out basically what I need. And so here we are, and again, we're in a situation where we can continue burning direct for the moon, so I don't shut down the engine. I just keep it burning. It's not particularly more efficient, but it was just simpler. So here we are, and we do get our transfer to the moon. I even try to make sure that we're going around retrograde as the real missions did. And we had a little bit of fuel left in that stage, but not as much after all of that. So it is just Valentina in here because Jeb, Bill, and Bob are in the other mission, and I didn't hire any new Kerbals. So Valentina's going to have to do it all on her own. And here we are all docked up. And separate from the S4B stage. Right click. Okay, I'll just do it in staging. So this is all during a live stream, by the way. And same live stream as with the previous video. Okay. And we are making orbit around the moon here. We have Kerbin Rise. The surface propulsion system in this context is still very powerful, even though I cut out a quarter of its thrust and nerfed its ISP by quite a bit. It still does the job, no problems, plenty of margin. And here we are. We are going to send Valentina over, and I want to separate off the Lunar Module. I have to say that the Lunar Module is really small here. The Lunar Module actually has more room than the Command Module in real life. It's actually the same width as the Command Module. So they've made the Lunar Module really small. I don't know why. It's actually supposed to be bigger. And actually, if it was bigger and heavier and had more fuel in, that would sort of make the Saturn V a little bit more realistic. I actually accidentally drained the monopropellant from the Lunar Module, so I had to redock. And interestingly, I was able to control the Command and Service Module. The Command and Service Module had to do the redocking. I don't know why I was able to control it without Kerbal in, but I was. So, not sure about that. But I'm so used to realism overhaul rules that maybe I'm just forgetting some of the rules of stock. Anyway, so after picking up the monopropellant, and we don't have too much, I would really like to put some more monopropellant in here for future missions, especially since there's no reaction wheel. There's no reaction wheel in this Lunar Module, very important to note. So, got to take that into consideration. Might want to add a reaction wheel yourself if you're conducting these missions, and I'll show you why in a sec. So here we are landing on the moon. Fuel-wise, we have no problem. The fuel I tucked into that descent module is very good, and 48 7S's. I think it's a spark engine, I want to say. I think it's a spark engine. Anyway, does a fine job. And we sit down and we topple over. So again, no reaction wheel in the command module. And what I should have done there is, I was counting on the reaction wheel. I should have turned on RCS. Also, we landed a little bit hard. The velocity was a little bit hard, but certainly I should have had RCS on while landing. And as a result now, in order to straighten ourselves out, we had to use a lot of RCS. And when I extended the landing gear, I decided to extend the landing gear here. That was not such a good idea, because I extended the landing gear and then we pop up and flip over anyway. Frankly, it might be better just to land without landing gear. So here we go again with the RCS, straightening ourselves out. Good thing, without the landing gear, we have a nice flat bottom there. And I just leave it like this and have Valentina get out. And at this point in the live stream, well, you can see what I decided to type there. We had so many problems with this flight, but I decided to follow this flight instead of Jeb, Bill, and Bob because there were so many problems. Our fuel margins were much tighter because we lost the second stage, so I felt it was much easier. Heck, it sort of made, you know, Apollo 13 look like a cakewalk. At least they didn't lose the second stage, right? So, yeah. I thought this was more challenging, and also with the single Kerbal instead of 3. So here we go. Time to launch. Now, I deliberately thrust limited the descent module engine so that just in case it tried to ignite it, which it did, it wouldn't cause a problem, but it turned out that the descent module got caught on us even after we decoupled. So my little gizmoing it up and trying to make everything look nice Well, at least the thrust from the ascent engine blew up the descent module engine, so it is able to provide us thrust and doesn't have any obstruction. It's going right through. So that's good. But otherwise, I'll have to fix that descent module up so it actually separates properly. Carrying the descent module up was especially cumbersome because we don't have any RCS thrusters on it, and the RCS on the ascent module is only balanced for the ascent module. So docking is a pain, and I ended up using way too much mod propellant on approach here. Even though I thrust limited the RCS on the ascent module, it was still probably too forceful. I should have thrust limited it more, and there we are running out of mod propellant. So I decided to EVA Valentina to get her to the command module. I could of course have used the command module to do all the docking, which I think is how that worked, but there was nobody inside, and I felt it was a little bit cheaty maybe? I don't know. I just felt like we should just EVA at that point. We were going to dump the Lunar Module anyway. So here we are going back home. Surface propulsion system still doing its job, and you can see margins not tight at all. So there is our trajectory back to Kerbin, and I think I bring it down to like 24 kilometers, but I had to get used to the whole stock scale and stock time warp, and clearly I time warped right into Kerbin's atmosphere, so I had to hurriedly separate off the service module. Yeah, I need to get used to things at this scale again. Lots of things. Now, we weren't getting any flame effects with this Apollo module, and I checked whether I had the aerodynamic effects on properly, and they were on normal. So that was puzzling. Not much with the new re-entry effects on this module. Anyway, parachutes out, Valentina's all good. Returning home safe and sound after a mission with remarkable failures, all sorts of things going wrong. But certainly you can tell that the Saturn V, as introduced by the Making History DLC, has tons of Delta V for you to work with. If you want to do dual missions, I think it'd be better suited for that than for the moon. And yeah, I think you can get a lot of mileage out of this rocket, basically. But if you wanted to use it just for moon missions and really recreate Apollo, you're going to have to dump a lot of the fuel in the tanks and thrust them at the engines, and I'll try and figure out what the numbers are for that. But anyway, mission accomplished. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, please do press like, and I'll see you next time.